And welcome into In Depth with Fox Carolina Sports. Hey there, I'm Aaron Cheslock. As we do each week, we talk with local coaches and athletes and walk their path to the particular point in their careers. And boy, we got a great and timely episode for you this week. One of the all-time great defensive backs for the Clemson Tigers, Mr. Robert Smith, a Palmetto State product himself, kind enough to join us. We're going to talk a little bit about Robert and what he's up to now. Of course, his great time with Clemson. And of course, we're doing the episode this week as the rivalry game gets set to kick off for the 118th time. Mr. Smith, how are you, sir?
Doing good. Thank you for having me on.
Hey, man, I appreciate it. We've done a bunch of stories over the years, so I'd encourage you, if you haven't, to go back in the archives of Fox Carolina. It's all online. Check out Robert's story about his post-Clemson career, going to the NFL, and all the things that went on with that. Again, Brent Venables calls him one of the smartest football players he's ever been around, and don't cross him either. I'm sure you can still lay a pretty mean hit there as well. Robert, first of all, I know you hung up the cleats at this point, and you're still doing some big things in the Palmetto State, in the upstate in particular. Fill the folks in on what you're doing these days.
Yeah, so back in 2017, I actually obtained a franchise and for some local publications. So now I currently have 4 publications that I run. They're all local and very targeted publications. So I do one publication that's called Elevation Living. It goes to the residents of the Cliffs communities for all 7 of them. I do a publication that's called Clemson Living, same style, but it goes to the residents in Clemson that's in the neighborhoods of Patrick Square, Clarendon Hall, Country Walk, and Westcott. I kind of ventured out a little bit and kind of did something different. And I have a publication that's called Be Local. It's a publication that goes to new movers and go to a new set of new movers every single month into Anderson, Oconee, and Pickens County, so the Tri-County area. And the 4th one that I ramped up and launched this year is called Upstate Real Producers. And that publication goes to the top 500 realtors of the upstate. So everything that we do just allow businesses to kind of reach their ideal clientele, stay in front of them. We do quarterly social events, and we've kind of stepped into the digital world as well, allowing people to kind of reach people digitally as well.
Yeah, people wanted to reach out to kind of get involved with what you're doing. What would be the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, they can reach me at my cell phone number, which I'm going to put out here, which would be 843. Yeah, we might need to cut that one. I don't know.
Let's not do the cell phone number.
I just thought about that. I was like, oh.
How about a website? Do they have a website they can go to?
We'll do the email.
Okay.
So if someone wants to reach me, then they can reach out to me at robert.smith at N2Pub. That's robert.smith at the letter N, the number 2, pub, pub.com. All
right. I appreciate that. You're about to have all those folks we see meeting at the Paul after the games on Saturday start hitting you up about inside stories about Brent Venables. Robert, when we look at your Clemson career, there are so many great moments. But just from a defensive standpoint, those 13-14 defenses are 2 of the best I've ever covered while covering the Clemson Tigers. When you think about the strengths of those teams, and then you look at this unit that Brent Venables has put together for this year, obviously they don't have Brian Brzee right now, but for the most part, they've stayed pretty healthy. What would you say are the biggest things that you would compare, and what are the things that you'd contrast when you look at, a line of Grady Jarrett and Vic Beasley and, Miles Murphy and Brian Brzee, Xavier Thomas, James Skalski, Stephon Anthony, yourself, Nolan Turner, those kinds of the ins and outs. Where would you say the similarities lie, and where are the biggest differences?
I'll probably say the similarities, and I think this is going to really go for any Brent Venables defense, no matter what year it's been, is just not having a sense of entitlement. That's kind of like a phrase that's thrown around forever since Coach Venables got there. And also playing with passion in the heart and just relentless all the time. One thing you're always going to see with Clemson defense is running to the ball, accountability. Everyone plays with heart. So it doesn't surprise me. The fourth downs, hey, the game on the line. are going to make it happen. It's kind of ironic against Louisville that it's almost like the same play happened in 2014, almost exactly how it happened. So it's almost like they ran the same play, which is a whole different coaching staff. So that was kind of ironic that happened. But that's when it comes to Brent Venables and that coaching staff. That's something that's ingrained from day one. Someone was just recently asked me what makes Clemson defensive football so good, and really it starts with the guy at the helm, which is Brent Venables. Every day is up here. So I always say, like, kids, when it comes to their parents, they're always trying to find, days when they kind of a little bit loosen up so they can kind of get away with stuff. But Coach Venables has set the expectations so high. So every player, he really gets the most out of them when they're on the field. And I think that really speaks volumes, not just the way he coached, but he's that way. He always brings it every single time. And the coaching staff is the same way. It's like follow suit. So he gets so much out of his players there. So that would be some similarities. I'll probably say the biggest difference, I won't say a huge difference, is we all kind of came in together in that 14 group, along with that 2011 group, and also that 2010 signing class, which a lot of them pretty much got redshirted. We all were just kind of like one. I would probably say that's kind of like what kind of made us kind of all kind of collage together. We knew our roles. We didn't try to do things that, that we were expected to do. I was kind of like the quarterback of the defense in the back end. Stefan Anthony kind of made sure he handled everything up front through the front seven. Then you had guys like Grady Jarrett, obviously Vic Beasley. They were just a force to be reckoned with up front. So I look at those guys now, and man, I think every single one of those guys played in the NFL, at least on an NFL contract. So you think about that, that's compared to, some of the guys that just recently went to the NFL as well.
Yeah, and Robert with a stint with the Seahawks and the Colts himself, that entire defense, so many stars on that team. And, there's so many stars on this defense as well. And, I mentioned Miles Murphy and Brian Brzee, James Skalski, a guy who's played now his 6th year of Clemson football.
Yeah.
I'm sure there are a lot of defenders that would have loved that opportunity as well. But when you look at all the stars on this defensive unit, who's the guy that stands out to you that maybe we don't think about, that's doing the little things well, that Robert Smith, who's played in the system, knows the defense, knows what Clemson likes to do? Who's the guy that you've watched and you go, okay, that's a glue guy that nobody's given enough credit to?
Really, I have to say 3 guys. First off, I'm going to say this one. This is hands down off rep Makumba. I watched it. I didn't even know he was going to start. I was at the Georgia game. I've heard of his name, didn't really know. And when you see a defensive back walk around low, staying low, running to the ball, I think it's really impressive. Not only that, I played in Brent Venables defense as a safety, and it is not the easiest thing to catch on and kind of play at the level that he's been playing. So definitely Makumba definitely has been one of the guys that I actually reached out to Coach Venables after the Georgia game. I was like, who's number 1? That's what I want to know, who's number 1. He actually has some Earl Thomas tendencies that I kind of studied over the years and had a privilege kind of like being a side-by-side with him a little bit at Seattle. Then I would probably say Miles Murphy, man. We always have this thing at Clemson. It's the motto of consistency. I know you probably heard that plenty of times. And just throughout the year, Miles Murphy just has been so consistent every single game. And I think that's what coaches trust. And when I look at it, he's always making plays. He's always around. He's always in the game. He's so dependable. And then I would probably say, without hands down, I think he's actually one of the best cornerbacks that I've seen at Clemson all around. He kind of reminds me a little bit of Bashad Breeling, Booth. He kind of has that aggressiveness. He's willing to tackle. That's kind of what Bashad Breeling was like when I was there. He just kind of had that same style, kind of like a long corner as well.
Yeah, Booth's the one guy that we keep seeing jump up the NFL draft boards for this year. So that's the one that you can kind of bank on going in those early rounds. I want to ask you, we're going to get to the actual rivalry game here in a second, but last year, COVID, obviously it impacted all of us in different ways. Looking at it from a specific college football standpoint, the rivalry games, most of them weren't played. Certainly the ones with SEC and ACC teams. It broke a 111-year streak of Clemson and South Carolina playing every year. You're from the Palmetto State, former Woodland High star. What does this game mean to you? And can you imagine going through a Clemson football season without playing the rivalry game?
No, that was kind of strange. I think a lot of Clemson fans definitely want to play last year. I'm not sure if a lot of South Carolina fans was upset about it. I'm just have some fun with this rivalry week. But I mean, when I was growing up in the Low Country, especially, and being born and raised in South Carolina, you always heard about the Clemson and the South Carolina rivalry. And just think about last year, it didn't happen. And every year, especially when I was with Clemson, that was just that one game that was very emotional. And unfortunately, I did lose 3 times, but I did stop it my senior year. And just thinking about this, this is the one that affects your parents at work, you throughout the year, friends, family. It's something that's always going to be talked about until the next year. So just think about the rivalry and the history that it is. And I always tell people, we live in South Carolina. We don't have sports. We don't have major cities. This is the big show of the year. This is our Super Bowl.
When you think about the foundation that your class really set, Dab always says it goes back to C.J. Spiller, but when you're looking at wins and losses, your class really started this upswing of Clemson football. Of course, they won't be making the college football playoff this year. ACC championship, as we are taping right now on Wednesday night, still a possibility. We'll have to see what happens with NC State and Wake. But when you think about the turns of this rivalry series, you come into a rivalry where SC had won 2, and then they win the next 3 to make it 5 in a row. One for the thumb, as Gamecock fans would love to point out. And I know that the 2012 rivalry game hurt a ton in Death Valley. 2013, Williams-Brice Stadium. I think that both those games were looked up as toss-ups because both these teams were ranked pretty high, expected to do big things in the postseason. These are high-profile matchups. Then in 2014, a bunch of that initial class is gone. You're there for one more year with some other guys that hung around. Deshaun Watson comes in, of course, the heroic performance at Death Valley on torn ACL, where you guys break the streak of 5 in a row. And Clemson hasn't lost since. So I'm curious about the dynamic in the locker room. If you could take us inside Clemson football a little bit to what it was like year in, year out from 2011, 2013, and then what was the mindset in 2014? And then I guess the third part of that question would be the elation after the game on 2014 as well.
Yeah, I just obviously going in 2014, it was something that was like that, that glaring, cloud over us. It was like no matter what we did postseason, BCS bowl game, beating LSU, we still had that one deal was kind of hanging over us. I'll never forget before Friday night, Friday before pre-games, and Coach Sweeney kind of put up, these pictures. They were going around conventions and speaking engagements, and they would take pictures with people, and you see like kids throwing the five bomb up. And I guess that just really hit us because we know Coach Sweeney and we know Coach Venables, no matter who you pull for, they wouldn't just like, hey, you're a Carolina fan or something like that and kind of brush you aside. And we really wanted it for Coach Sweeney. We knew that was something that he just need to take that hump, get over that hump to kind of like settle that part of his coaching career at that point. So that was, it was so much emotions that night. I always tell people I wanted that game so bad. And I'll never forget, it was 12 o'clock at night. It was a noon game. And I just remember, my first camp was at South Carolina. And I played quarterback in high school. So I remember Steve Spurrier was teaching us quarterback sneaks. I always remember he said, always go off center, always go off center. And so I got up in the middle of the night. I just kind of like studied.
I know the play you're talking about.
Yeah.
It already clicked.
Yeah, and I'll never forget. I just could not believe it was 4th and 1. I want to say like on the 20 or 30 or something like that. I can't remember. I just remember looking at Dylan Thompson's eyes and they looked left. And I was like, he's coming over off center. He going quarterback sneak it. And he kind of got held up a little bit. And I actually got in there to kind of get the tackle for a loss. And it was turnover on downs. And I still got this picture. I remember going to Coach Sweeney the night before and said, they're going to run a quarterback sneak and run all center. So I have a picture of me and him come give like a high five because it was like he knew that I knew that exact play, what was going to happen. Obviously, I had to be a little bit more disciplined. I couldn't pull the Ben Bullware and kind of just jump across the line just because just playing the safety, last line defense. But the emotions of that game leading up to that point, in the mindset of those seniors, and at the time we were the winningest senior class ever, there was no way we were going to leave Clemson, saying that we lost all 4 years. It was just impossible. It was at any means necessary. We were going to do what we had to do to win. It was at home. Our hopes and dreams of going to the college football playoffs, which would have been the first year they've done it, was kind of gone at that point. We pretty much knew that. So again, just those emotions going through that game. And we lost some pretty close ones ever since 2011. It was just one was Dylan Thompson wasn't expected to play. Con Shaw wasn't playing. He ran on basically a quarterback draw. The year after that, we kind of had to drop punts and stuff like that. So it was always that emotion after the game where we knew we could have won. And I'll give credit to South Carolina. I think people forget, they were a top 10, top 3 team. They had a really good football team. And again, we really wanted to make sure that we did it for Coach Sweeney. And more importantly, the fans, man. I just remember the fans, like after that game, on the field, people were crying because we won. And I was like the most amazed. I was crying. My mom was crying. My dad, he's not going to cry, but he was emotional. But my family was crying because they just knew that was my last game playing in Death Valley. But it was something that was kind of like lingering throughout the Clemson fan base. And so many people just walk up and say, thank you, thank you. And after the game, you guys probably saw this, Coach Sweeney, because of the 5 bombs, he had got these styrofoams that were just one that he gave all the players. So me and Mike Williams, you probably know this, that we kind of grew up right down the road from each other, rivalry at high schools, and we kind of took a picture with that as well. So it's truly a special week, special moment, and kind of see that not happen last year was definitely odd.
Yeah, and when you think about the implications for this season, the odds. The path for Clemson to get to the ACC championship is not up to them anymore. It depends on what happens later on this week. But if Wake or NC State wins, Clemson's likely going to a bowl game that's not a college football playoff, not a BCS game. With the last time that happened was 2014. I know you guys played in major bowl games in 2012. Obviously, the huge Orange Bowl win in 2013, but 2014 was kind of a changing of the guard, so to speak, on the offensive side of the ball. So I think that this rivalry game has even more importance in that regard too, because depending on who Clemson plays in the bowl game, it might not be a more high-profile matchup than South Carolina, what they're playing this year. I want to ask you about this game. I do know, you mentioned you're a quarterback, and I know you are. Every safety that is a captain and play caller. You guys are pretty familiar with what goes on the offensive side of the ball. So I do want to get your take on Clemson in this game. They're projected to win by double digits. I should say that South Carolina has been a double-digit underdog the last 2 times they played in a primetime game at Williams-Brice Stadium. They knocked off both Florida and Auburn. Obviously, looking at it a few weeks in hindsight, the win over Auburn looks a lot more impressive than the win over Florida. But South Carolina is not afraid at this moment. They have seniors that are on this team that have the exact same mindset that you had in 2014, that they don't want to go winless against Clemson. The Tigers' offense, riddled with injuries this entire year. DJ Uiagalelei hasn't quite hit the gas right from the get-go the way that Deshaun did and the way that Trevor did. Multiple injuries at wide receiver, running backs in the transfer portal. Braden Galloway's out. Justin Ross, Joseph Ngata, they're not going to be able to play in this game. What does Clemson need to do well from what you've seen this year to establish offensive dominance and make sure that they're keeping up on the scoreboard should South Carolina put some points up?
I think it's the same thing they did against Wake Forest. You could tell that that team was playing for pride at that point. Playing for pride. They were playing for, hey, listen, we're gonna create our college football playoffs. And I think in their mindset, you know, Wake Forest is kind of like that playoff game, and South Carolina is probably going to be like that championship game for them. Like, hey, this is it. And then, what happens after that, we'll kind of go from there. Definitely, I think we all know playing in Willie B 7:30 at night is definitely not. It's one of the more hostile environments in college football. And we all know that South Carolina, again, they got this cloud kind of lingering over them as well. They see a window of opportunity. Clemson has been dominant since 2014, has some really good play. And I think when it comes to DJ, I think he has something to play for as well. I think watching that Wake Forest, and I really commend a guy like DJ. I know it hasn't been easy. I know it's been, hard. He has high expectations for himself, but the guy hasn't thrown in the towel. He hasn't, he's out there with a splint on his finger last week. He could easily say, I'm done. I think if anything that speaks what kind of kid he is and what kind of leader he is, regardless of what his career turns out to be, I think that says a lot. And I think that says a lot for those guys. That this is a guy, obviously, his something's going on with his knee and, wearing a splint, and he's out there still trying his best to put them in the best opportunity to play. So I think Clemson just go out there, and I think the one thing what they did for Wake is play for each other. And I think the coaches, they're coaching for each other. And I think when you look at that, you can't control the injuries. You can't control the transfer portal. You can't control, guys gone to the NFL. You only can play what you got now, and that means Will Sweeney lining up there in the slot. They're going to do it, and I think that's just the epitome of, again, looking back at it, nobody wanted it more in 2014 than the players wanted for the coach. And I think when people look at, situation that Coach Sweeney kind of in this year, when people are questioning, his coaching and what's gotten him this far, I think the players want to prove like, hey, listen, we don't just come here to play football. We come here and we become brothers and we become a family, and we're playing for a guy who ultimately believed in us and gave us a commitment, not just for 3, 4, or 5 years, but the commitment is for life.
They're taking on a South Carolina offense that really has been in flux up until the last couple of weeks. Multiple injuries at quarterback. Luke Doty from your area, Myrtle Beach rather, was the guy that was projected to start, kind of in the mold of Connor Shaw, dual threat, but maybe not quite as accurate in the passing game as Shaw was right from the get-go. He goes down. Then they bring in Zeb Nolan, who was a grad assistant coach, right? And then he ends up getting the starting nod. He plays a couple games. He suffers an injury. Then it's Jason Brown, transfer from St. Francis, who gets the reins for the Florida game. And he hadn't looked back since. He's looked very good in 2 starts, hit or miss in the loss they had at Missouri. You look at the running game, they have Kevin Harris, the leading SEC rusher from a year ago, Marshawn Lloyd, a 5-star freshman that had to sit out all of last year, finally getting his chance. But the guy that's really shined for them of late is Zaquandre White. So you've got 2 guys at the quarterback and running back position that started the year as number 3 on the depth chart. They're now starting the rivalry game in an environment that I'm not sure that either one of them quite understand what it's going to be like on Saturday night. There is some talent at the skill positions, a great tight end in Nick Muse, of course. His brother, Tanner Muse, former Clemson defensive back. And then Josh Fan on the outside, E.J. Jenkins. There is a lot of talent on this South Carolina team. But much like Clemson, they've been Jekyll and Hyde week in, week out, up until this recent run that they've had against Auburn and Florida. Now, when you look at Clemson's defense matching up with an offense like South Carolina's, and especially seeing how Clemson shut Wake Forest down, who, I'll remind folks, was an offensive wagon for the better part of this season. I know that sounds weird to hear Wake Forest, be this juggernaut offensively, but that's what they've been. However, as we saw this game last week against Wake for Clemson, very much looked like the games of Wake Forest and Clemson that you played in and every year since you played. So when you look at that defensive performance against a team like South Carolina with a lot of new faces still kind of meshing together, but with some talent, what do you see on Clemson's defense that gives them a leg up? And what do they need to do to slow South Carolina down?
I would say first off, I have to do this. You got to give some credit to Shane Beamer. I will give credit to him. Shane Beamer actually recruited me at South Carolina. He was actually the first person to kind of like pull me in from high school. I hadn't even played a high school football game, and I actually went to South Carolina camp first. And I always say this, and not to discredit who he is, but he has that dabbleism in him. Most people, when they saw, I can't remember what game it was, they were getting blown out and I had just finally scored a touchdown. He was still celebrating. And I knew what he was doing. He was showing those guys like, I got to fight. We're going to get through this. And it reminded me a lot of, I was getting recruited at a time when Clemson was 6-7 and some of the things weren't going so well when the Clemsoning thing was going on. Dabo was kind of doing that. And Shane Beamer is a phenomenal person, great. If it was somebody who I didn't want them to get, it was definitely him, because I knew what kind of recruiter he was. I knew what kind of person he was. And he reminded me a lot of Dabo. And again, not to take nothing away from him, but when it comes to Clemson with the leg up, I think the experience, and I think the bragging rights that they've had, kind of like, hey, we are Clemson and we have a fierce defense. I think we got to ride on that and capitalize on that point. And I think that's the biggest thing. We have some injuries, but at the same time, I think people still know that it's Clemson defensive football. They know that for sure. And I think, they're going to prepare and say, hey, this is a team that, not just 2014, basically since 2012, they've been getting progressively better and set a standard when it comes to, playing football and playing defensive football as well. So I think those guys have the leg up when it comes to that. We know that when it comes to this game, everybody's going to give their best shot no matter what. So you can't sit here and say, well, South Carolina hadn't done this and hadn't done that. They got some guys on that offense. So both teams had to show up and play, but I think Clemson just ride off of, hey, this is Clemson football.
The parallels between Shane Beamer and Dabo Swinney, I still can't get over, because I see the exact same thing that you see, and obviously I'm on the outside looking in. But both of these guys were position coaches and recruiting coordinators when Dabo started out at Clemson and Shane Beamer was at South Carolina for his first stint. And both of them seem to run their programs in similar ways, which is, something that is not the norm in college football these days. So I do think that and the weird thing about this whole deal is that they genuinely like each other and they're open about liking each other. We know now that Dabo and Steve Spurrier were friends off the field, but they were, giving jabs back and forth. We didn't know that at the time. We thought they genuinely didn't like each other. I'll say there were some interactions between Coach Swinney and Will Muschamp that left you scratching your head. You're not quite sure what the relationship was there, but they didn't seem to be going out and hanging out after the game either. So we'll see how this all shakes out. But the credit for Shane Beamer taking over a 2-win program, getting them bowl eligible, wins over Florida and Auburn. That's a big deal, regardless of what happens in this game. I think. There are brighter days ahead for South Carolina, regardless of the outcome. Robert, I appreciate you joining us. I got one more question for you. I want you to think back, because in 2011, I don't think you were starting yet, but take me back to 2013 when you're running out of the tunnel at Williams-Brice Stadium. And that night crowd, that game I have circled in my bucket list of things, that game in particular, as one of the most intense atmospheres I've ever been in, because you could feel the tension. Taj Boyd, Connor Shaw, Grady Jarrett, Jadeveon Clowney. There are so many big names in this game, and obviously it didn't go the way you guys wanted, but there are going to be a lot of Clemson players in a similar situation running out of the tunnel at Williams-Brice Stadium this Saturday night. If you could speak to your Clemson Tigers, the guys are going to be going through this for the very first time, what advice would you give them before kickoff?
Put the blinders on. It is the most hostile environment that I've ever been in. And I tell people to this day, I probably, unless it's a high school game, would never, ever step foot in that stadium again. It was definitely an eye opener. It was something that for the first time in my life, I could truly say I really felt hated. Like truly felt hated. And hey, that's what you call home field advantage, right? That's their thing, and they're gonna let you know that hey, it's a rivalry game, and put the blinders on, go and play, and give them something to be upset about. Don't give them a chance to be in the game because it is a hostile environment. And don't think about the stuff that's going on that you can't control. You cannot control the crowd. You cannot control the things that's going to be thrown at you.
Maybe literally.
Literally, yeah, all kind of stuff. So put the blinders on, play football, and the best thing is let your work speak for yourself, and quiet Willie B, because it's again Willie B 7:30 at night. I think I played there twice. 7:30 at night, at least a night game, and it was definitely a hostile environment. Something that I was honestly, it was worse than 2011, and I thought 2011 was pretty bad. And again, this is something that could really make their season. They've had their ups and downs, their ebbs and flows, and they know that they can stunt Clemson's like hopeful of, hey, they kind of caught this wave, and this Clemson, what we know it for, is coming back, but also can kind of put a stamp on South Carolina's first year as Shane Beamer and say, hey, we're coming, and and no one's going to slow us down. So put the blinders on, go out and play ball, and shut them up by some good smash mouth defensive football. And I'm gonna go ahead and call it, and I'm gonna say DJ is going to have his best game. I think he's going to have his best game. I think the guy's going to go out there and play for him. I think that this is something that he wants, and this is something that he needs to say, hey, listen, I'm not going to say his last name, but DJ he's here, and he ain't going anywhere, and he got something to prove as well.
There could be a better time for it if you're a Clemson fan. South Carolina, Clemson, it's one of the biggest rivalries in all of college football, and in this state, it has ramifications much further than a win and a loss. This is something that you could use to recruit for the however many years moving forward. It really could signal a change in South Carolina's culture. It could also just seal the deal as Clemson as the dominant team in the state of South Carolina once again. And nobody knows that more than Robert Smith, one of the guys who helped snap the 5-game losing streak in 2014. And Clemson's never looked back since. Robert, thank you so much for taking some time with us. We certainly appreciate it.
No, thank you, and go Tigers.
He is Robert Smith, the all-time Clemson great safety, and we thank him so much for his time this week. I want to thank you as well for joining us for this week's episode of In Depth with Fox Carolina Sports. Have another great episode for you next week.